Today I'm joined by Jim Rees. Jim is the managing director and founder of Thorn Security, which is the premier provider for information security services in Europe. So, hi, Jim.
Hello, how are you doing, Simon?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Um, so, Jim, look, let's start off. Just tell us a little bit more about, Thorn Security.
Absolutely. So, Raised Thorn Security is what's known as an information security, or in using the more sexier recent language, cybersecurity consultancy. So, what we do is we facilitate customers with their kind of cybersecurity and information security needs. So, whether they need sort of help with some regulation, we've got incoming things like DORA, for instance, which is obviously based on information security. PCI DSS. I myself am a QSA. I go and assess organisations for the payment card industry on whether or not they're secure enough to sort of meet the standard. But in essence, that's what we do. We also do something called penetration testing, which normally gets a lot of people sort of raised eyebrows. But what in essence that is it's where we have ethical hackers facilitating targeted attacks on customers that want us to kind of test their security and tell them where their vulnerabilities, their issues, their risks lie. So, if it's a website, whether it's your internal infrastructure or whatever, what the guys and gals in my team will do is they will try to do everything they can to break into it like one of the bad guys. And then we provide you with a report which kind of tells you where the problems are so you can go away and fix them and so on and so forth. And then finally, the last tranche of business that we've kind of implemented recently is a continuous penetration testing product called Razor's Edge. There's a big theme here. Um, and what that does is it allows you to do that kind of penetration testing rather than a snapshot in time. It allows you to draw it out over a full 12-month period. So you know at any point what your vulnerabilities, what your issues are. So if you've got big updates going on in your infrastructure, rather than waiting 6 months to kind of provision the next test, it's done there and then. Um, Basically, we do anything in the cybersecurity space. Whatever you need, that's what we do. And we like to think we're pretty good about it. Obviously, you read the tagline from the website there, the premier for Europe, and we are. We do consider ourselves one of the best in the business at what we do. We have some fantastic people here who are some of the top in their game.
Brilliant. Okay. No, thank you for that, giving that overview. And I should imagine not only a really interesting business, but a business that is growing and constantly changing as well. So, but we'll get into that in a little bit because I'd like to dig into that. But first of all, let's take a step back and sort of. So you, if I understand correctly, you founded this business back in 2007. Have I got that right, Jim?
Oh yes, the
Yeah.
last credit crunch.
Okay.
I was a casualty of that, along with my team at the time, and a lot of other people as well. So on the day that I was made redundant, when it was evident that the economy was rapidly going down the toilet, like all good Brits, I went to the pub straight afterwards. You know, bag full of stuff from my desk kind of thing, thinking, right, what am I going to do with myself now? The economy wasn't exactly the greatest. And it was in the depths of probably the second or third pint that I decided, you know what, I'm going to go do it myself. I'd worked for a number of consultancies before, and many of them, and I don't mean this bad to any accountants out there, or salespeople, were kind of run either by accountants or salespeople. So they were very much concentrating on the cash aspect of what they were doing. What I wanted to do is kind of focus at it from a consulting point of view with a service perspective. So the better we do for the customers through providing them a good service, the more likely they are to come back. And of course, if you're rinsing a customer for everything you can get 5 seconds after meeting them, then they're not really going to be incentivized to stay with you. They will pick it up and they will obviously be a little bit annoyed with that. So what we do basically is we just concentrate on the work that they need. We advise them appropriately. If they like the service, they come back. And it seems to have worked because for the 17 odd years I think of being in business. I don't know anymore. It's lockdowns ruined time for me back then. We've got a client retention rate of 98%. And that was a figure that we pulled out last year when we looked back at the customers that we dealt with back in the early days versus the customers we're dealing with now. And you're absolutely right with what you said just a moment ago. It's a massive boom business that has been a big change since probably around about the lockdowns, maybe just a little bit beforehand, although it was stalled by those lockdowns. But today, it's a very different business world than it was when I first started. Security has become a huge item on every board of directors meeting agenda. How are we dealing with it? Because I mean, every day in the media, they're getting told, right, this company has been done for 5 million. This company's been done for 24 million. This company has gone under, or they've lost everybody's social security numbers. I mean, that kind of thing really kind of pushes cybersecurity forward. When I first started, it was tough getting the business. It was mainly financial institutions and institutions that had like strict governance on making sure they were secure that we tended to deal with. But today, there's not a sector we don't. And I mean that. There is literally not a sector we don't deal with nowadays. Go back 10 years, a very different market. But
over that time, Jim, like, and you sort of said there that there's a lot of things that have changed there. Since you founded your business in 2007, in the depths of a recession. Obviously, there's been, as you alluded to earlier, there's been COVID. It's a very the market you're in is a very changing market. Also, your business has changed. Your business has grown over that time as well. What's been the biggest challenge that you've faced being a business owner over the last 17 years?
Well, once you get past the massive vertical of learning how to run a business for the first time, with the fun and games with accounts, the fun and games with the legal side of things, making sure you get the good accountant, you get the good legal representation as early as possible. Not because you're going to get necessarily problems, but when you start recruiting people, you better have a really nice, solid, contract of employment and stuff like that. And of course, the accounts, well, if you're in the UK, HMRC, they like to get their pound of flesh. So to fill out the really complicated forms really requires some significant assistance from a very good accountant. So the learning curve is huge. But I mean, for us, the changing landscape of InfoSec is difficult to keep up with. And that's one of our biggest challenges. Everything changes very, very quickly. Technology has changed dramatically over the last sort of 10 years alone, 5 years. You look at it in any time scale. I mean, I come from a time when, God forbid, we didn't really have computers in our schools, and now they're everywhere. I didn't even have a phone when I was, when I was in my teenage years. Only later on in my teenage years that I got that level of technology. And it's very difficult for people, I think, who are maybe much younger to realize what it was like and the change that there was from the kind of late 90s to where we are today. I mean, my phone alone, what I can do with that, I couldn't do with a particularly expensive computer back in the 90s. And of course, with that kind of massive change, the criminals will follow and they will find ways to capitalize on it. We can't do without the internet today. It was one of the most significant technological advances that we did in the whole kind of raft of technological change that we've had, because it allowed communication at a really fast rate that we couldn't have before. So ideas get kind of dealt with a lot quicker. We can collaborate much more easily now. I mean, half of us are working still from home, due to the lockdowns. A lot of people never really went back to the office, and that's only been made possible by that technology. But with every advance that you have, when those criminals come in, they will look to take advantage of that.
You've got to, I guess in your industry, then you've got to try and stay one step ahead. You've got to be thinking about, or trying to think about things ahead to, I mean, you were talking about earlier about, trying to infiltrate people's sort of systems to identify
Yeah.
areas of weakness, for want of a better word. But is that challenging to try and, constantly be on that front foot with developments and innovation and
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is very tough. I mean, there are the best way I can describe information security, you've got the light side, which is us, and then you've got the dark side of the force, which is the malicious actors. And it's a constant battle, and it is a battle.
Yeah.
Because the faster they're innovating, we have to catch up. And they tend to innovate a lot faster in many respects than we do. We don't know what techniques they're going to use until they use them.
Yeah.
And then once we find out what they're doing, we have to react and respond very, very quickly. You get very, very good at instant response in InfoSec when you've kind of been in it for any length of time, and you realize that that's the key focal point in a large part of what we do. Having to adapt very, very quickly with very limited resources is a challenge that information security people have across any market that they're in. The budgets are comparatively low from what they need to be. They're changing very dramatically now, but it is a constant battle. And as fast as we kind of innovate ourselves to kind of get over the problems that we're seeing in the market with things like ransomware and so on and so forth, those people are moving just equally as fast to get around the defenses that we're putting in. And there are ways we can deal with that through something called defense in depth. Good example, you layer your security. You don't rely on a technological piece of innovation. You do training, you have good policies and procedures to back you up, and you have plans that, when the eventuality comes and you do get compromised, because everybody does at some point, at least then you've tried and tested your instant response to be able to recover as quickly and cleanly as you can, learn your lessons, and then adapt again. And it's constant cycles like that. Some other professions, I know there's always movement in every profession, but constants, the basics tend to stay very constant. We don't necessarily have that as information security professionals as something that we can kind of use as our basis.
Yeah.
Ransomware, good example. It's one of the biggest threats seemingly out there at the moment. Everyone's getting hit by it. You're seeing news article after news article after news article of ever bigger and, more sort of frightening companies in a wide range of sectors, even sort of critical functions like power companies, that kind of thing, getting hit by this. Companies that you would expect to have very good security because they're big companies. But the unfortunate truth is the bigger the company, the harder it is to secure. And I'll be honest, the bigger the company, it's very rare you ever find really, really good security across the board there. There are some real champions in that space. Don't get me wrong. I know a lot of good sort of peers of mine who do a really, really good job. But one of the biggest problems in InfoSec that we face is burnout. And it's quite frightening. We did we've got our own podcast called Razor Wire, and one of the most viewed videos is about burnout. And there was a lovely lady called Yanya who I saw her TED talk on burning out. She's an information security professional. She burned out one day quite dramatically and ended up in the hospital. And it's happening with increasing frequency because the problem in InfoSec is you can't turn off. Mm-hmm. Malicious attackers will attack at any time, middle of the night, early mornings, during the workday. It's normally early mornings or late at night because nobody's really looking. And you have to be on the ball and you have to go in. If you're on holiday and something kicks off, that's it. You're in. You're dealing with it, and you hope that you've got your team dealing with it whilst you're getting back on the flight to get back home to be able to deal with that problem.
What would you say your biggest learning has been since you've been in business, Jim?
Don't take everything at face value.
Okay.
And always be moving. Always be, weirdly enough, the biggest thing that I learned about running a business is a very much a concept that we have in InfoSec. I've already mentioned it, defense in depth, where you layer your security. In my business, I learned very early on that consultancy is very much a feast and famine type of business. You know, you either got the work or you haven't, or you're working towards getting the next piece of work. It can go up and down quite dramatically. So you need to be able to diversify your cash flow in order to make sure that you've got other areas where cash is flowing in. So when you get the trough times for your consultancy, the penetration testing is being nice and consistent, along with the other stuff that we do as well. And it's applying some of what I knew in InfoSec or cybersecurity, depending upon how you want to term it. And then looking at it from a business point of view, as in flipping it and using it as business principles. There's a big correlation between security and business that I don't think a lot of business owners really quite understand. You know, InfoSec people deal in risk, you know, how likely is it? What are our control measures? Blah, blah, blah. We can calculate risks to a quantitative level or a qualitative level, depending on what you want to do, which is basically the same thing that you do when you're running a business. Yeah. If I do this, how much is it going to potentially bring in? Is it going to cost me more to do that business than it is what I'm getting in? Well, then I won't do it. You know, if there's potential for it to go sky high and bring in millions upon millions of pounds, but there's a risk that, you know, I may overextend myself getting there, then yeah, it's you then have to decide on that calculated risk, and it's no different in InfoSec. Yeah. You know, my data that I hold, is it critical? Is it customer data? If it gets out and gets stolen, then, you know, is my PR going to fall apart, and all of a sudden I'm going to be in the media and my business is going to go down the toilet? How much is it going to cost me to protect that? Well, if I've got, say, 10 million coming in and it's going to cost me 15 million to secure it, you can't do it, you know. So you've got to find other avenues, and you do get very creative in InfoSec, and I found that that's the same in business as well. There's a lot of correlation. It's quite interesting.
How have you applied those learnings to your business, Jim?
By just applying defense in depth, you know, financial defense in depth, making sure that we've got sort of cash reserved away for those lean times, you know, that we've got diversified revenue coming in from different sources through different aspects of InfoSec. You know, creating our own product was probably one of the big turning points, because all the profit, other than obviously what it costs to keep it running, comes to us. Whereas, you know, if we resell some, you know, seam product, for instance, we would only get sort of like a 20% cut of selling that into a customer. This is a much bigger cut. So it allows us to kind of protect ourselves from the peaks and troughs that you get with cash flow and the velocity of money. But it also gives us money for us to be able to expand at the rate that we need to. You know, one of the dangers that we have is we've got so much business coming in at this moment in time that we have to expand, and we're going through forced expansions on a regular basis. And every time you do that, as you well know, if you're shoestringing a business and you don't have a deep and pocketed investor, it's a risk every time you do that. What happens if something falls apart? What happens if all of a sudden, you know, you get locked down and you can't go in and you do your consultancy, and you see your consultancy business suddenly drop down in through the toilet, you know? And that's kind of what saved us, weirdly enough, in the lockdowns. You know, a lot of firms stopped spending on consultancy. You couldn't go anywhere anyway, even if you wanted to. And they were going through difficulties themselves, you know. So we saw all of a sudden our profitability really drop because we just lost a big aspect of what we do. But luckily, because we'd shored up the rest of the business with the other types of business that we do, we survived out of it relatively intact. You know, I mean, everybody got affected in some way or another. But I saw a lot of organizations who were being forced to be sold because they overextended, or they run out of cash, or, you know, they were just having difficulty with the situation, we had difficulties like everybody else. I'm not saying we didn't, but we weathered it much better because we applied defense and depth to our revenue streams.
The big thing that I'm picking up there from, from everything you've said in is that business risk analysis and management. Being very aware of the risks in business that you're exposed to, whether that's cyber security, which so happens to be the industry you're in, but also in other areas. What's the risk on your cash flow? What's the risk on relying on one income stream? That be very aware of what the risks are in your business and make sure you've got risk mitigation strategies in place. That's the message that I've sort of really picked up from what you've been saying, Jim.
Oh yeah, I mean, one of the big ones that I was actually told this by my accountant very early on when I first started, before I really started employing anybody and getting some good quality sort of customers on board. I was still very small back then, waiting to come out of the credit crunch. And he said to me, he was a wise old accountant, a lovely guy. And he said, don't do the 80-20 rule. You should really look at having as many medium-sized customers as possible, as opposed to just having one or two very large ones and one or two sort of smaller ones. You need to diversify the customer base that you have in different sectors, from some very big ones, very medium-sized ones, and don't forget the small guys as well. And I that was one significant thing I learned very early on. And I've never turned away anybody who's come to us. We've helped people who are one-man bands, or one-person bands, rather. We've helped people who are massive multi-international organizations, and everybody in between. And it's meant that, it's protected us through the lean times and the difficult times. We still have challenges like everybody else, but yeah, that was probably one of the best pieces of advice I had.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. And look, there's one question, Jim, that I like to ask everybody that's kind enough to join us on these discussions, but that is, what is the best advice that you would give to an 18-year-old you?
Yes, this is a question I ask in my podcast to my guests as well. And this is the first time I've had a chance to answer this. So I'm looking forward to this one. If I was to basically walk into a bar where my 18-year-old self is sitting there having a beer after getting my first job in InfoSec and offer myself some advice, it would definitely be learn economics, learn psychology. In any trade, you should learn economics and psychology. Economics, because whilst you're young, you can invest wisely and not spend too much time down the pub doing drinking the beer and putting it down the drain. And psychology, because you're going to meet all kinds of people in life. Some of them are going to be really helpful, and they are wonderful people who will help you move along and advise you along the way, like my wily old accountant was. But then you're also going to meet people who are going to be from the other direction, those malicious actors. Again, I'm using an InfoSec perspective here, who are going to kind of take advantage of you, who are going to try to, in essence, drain you for as much as possible and then cast you aside. And you have to be able to recognize that. And so if you've gotten a good knowledge of psychology when you're dealing with people, then there's a very good chance you're going to do that. But I mean, equally, I'm a big reader of Sun Tzu, and there's a quote in Sun Tzu. I'm going to have to pull it up now to make absolutely certain I get it right. If you know your enemy and you know yourself, then you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not your enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. And if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, then you will succumb in every battle. Now, why is that important to my 18-year-old self? Because back when I was 18, I was bright-eyed and thought everybody was wonderful. And yes, there were a few interesting people out there who would take advantage, but they were in the minority. I didn't really understand myself, and I definitely didn't understand other people. With psychology, I allowed me to understand other people, and looking within myself and understanding my flaws and my problems and working on those also helped develop me into somebody who now tries to understand who I am as much as who the people I'm dealing with are, as well as those malicious actors that I'm also advising against. So I can kind of get the best out that whole situation, not only for my organization, but for any organization that we're working with and dealing with. So, as I say, security doesn't have to be expensive. It just needs to be effective. And there's a million ways you can skin that particular cat. You just got to find the right way. So,
look, some great advice there. Thank you, Jim. Like, learn economics, learn psychology, and the other thing that that I picked up from what you were saying there was, focus on you. Sort of, what are we often focus on others, okay, which we still need to do, but actually spend time focusing on us, what areas we need to develop and enhance and be good at. So yeah, some great advice there. Thank you very much, Jim. And so, Jim, look, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me today and sharing more about your business and also your journey as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much, Simon. It's been absolutely fantastic. And as I said before, I've done this with so many other people. It's really nice to have it the other way, actually, because it makes you think.
Absolutely. That's always good to see it from the other way around, isn't it? Yeah.